Chapter 21. Tit for Tat. Renoir looked up. The slapper grinned down at him. You are remembering. To the east, Renoir saw the light of coming dawn begin to break the plain and bring with it the morning. The slapping man saw it too. He smiled again. I have a gift to share with you while you sleep. I will seek you once you've crossed over, and we will continue this. Until then, good night, sweet prince. Flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. The slapper kneeled beside him. The slapper reached out a hand and touched Renoir's forehead. In Renoir's brain, there was a burst of bright green light and a ringing in his ears. He opened his eyes, trying to understand what had just occurred. One at a time, the men surrounding Renoir collapsed to the ground. The slapper was lost to go, falling backward, hitting the ground like a sack of rotten apples, shrapnel helmet bouncing away into the weeds. Renoir tried to move. His legs were free. He scrabbled them in the mud, trying to drive them upward, but the fallen tree they hefted and laid across his chest might as easily have been a marble column. It was then that Renoir fully realized the danger he was in. The tiny trickle of water running beneath him had stopped its gentle caper to the distant river. Welcomed and trapped by the stones and the tree, the cold water had already begun to gather and pool itself around the base of his skull and neck. Half an hour later, the water reached his ears and started to encircle his throat. When his ears filled, dampening all sounds but his breath and his pulse, quiet panic set in. He kicked his legs and used all his strength and desperation to lift the log, but it would not budge. The more he kicked, the slicker the mud became, and he lost all purchase for his boots. When Renoir tried to find calm, he failed. The rising water crested the bottom of his neck after an hour. 15 minutes later, it brushed against his chin. The end was coming. As the water tickled his lower lip, the parting gift the slapping man gave him played out in his mind. Renoir saw it happen in cinematic glory. It put him, as an invisible ghost, back in Liège in 1914, right there when sweet Léonie saw the German horseman coming. It came in full color, and unlike the bits of silent cinema he had seen, it ran with resonant audio. For all intents and purposes, he was in the rooms where it occurred, bearing witness. Léonie knew she had few options. Stay and be raped for a pittance until the merciful end came, or run. Even so, for the time being, and to her soon coming regret, she did neither. She held her ground. Renoir had gone to secure his last wagon load of rifles and left her in charge. Per his request, she separated the money in his cash box amongst the girls. All she had to do now was buy time for him to return so he could be the brave knight, leading them to safety. As the German riders approached, she girded herself with the only weapons at hand, her charming smile and quick wit. She readied for battle. She walked out onto the front stoop to greet them. The Prussian colonel, Erich Goethe, rode a young, ungelded Andalusian stallion. Joshua was breathtaking, white with a dark grey mane and tail, grey striations throughout his shining coat running to black at his hooves. By then, Erich had ridden Joshua and his sires with the 10th Ulan Cavalry for 32 years. Erich was 11 when the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 commenced. He followed the conflict with near religious fervor. He watched in desperate, silent awe as his eldest brother, Tobias, galloped off with the Prussians to spill French blood at Sedan and Metz, then cantered his own Andalusian stallion, Joshua's great-great-great-great-grandsire, Leviticus, through the streets of Paris itself when the capital fell in early 1871. Tobias returned from the war with medals and scars and an appetite for French wine that was near unquenchable. It led to brutally painful gout, which made his one remaining joy, riding Leviticus's progeny through the Alpine foothills, impossible. The gout got so bad that he killed himself on his 45th birthday. Knowing how much pain he had been enduring, the family took it in stride. Even as they buried him with full military honors and broken-hearted tears, there were whispers amongst the mourners that it was, likely as not, for the best. He might be gone, but at least he was out of his misery. Eric did not partake in the whispers or the tears. He silently saluted his brave, war-haunted brother and bade him farewell. At the time of Tobias's suicide, Eric was 36-year-old lieutenant colonel in the Uhlans, a 36-year-old lieutenant colonel who had never seen battle or struck a blow in anger. If an emotion struck him at the tomb, it was not sadness, it was jealousy. In his brother's footsteps, he had devoted himself to the military for the entirety of his existence, but to that day, Eric had still not faced an actual enemy on the battlefield. The hours on horseback, on maneuvers, in the barracks, studying, teaching, and training his men to ride, fight, and kill could be measured in years. Following Tobias's path, he had served his nation with the same level of honor and excellence as his eldest brother, but he had yet to put a lick of that effort into concrete practice. The lack of a proper rite of passage for his own skills as a warrior filled him with shame. The fact galled Eric, but he suffered through it. He held fast to his trust in human nature, faith-filled that his time must come. He understood that war was innate. History taught Eric that violent conflict at scale was inevitable. He would hold steadfast to patience until that day came. When the day arrived, he would be ready. He would make Tobias smile proudly from his tomb. And now, in Belgium, in 1914, the day was upon him. He was balanced on the precipice, and it made him giddy as a schoolgirl inside. But just as he contained himself and showed no tears at Tobias's funeral, and just as he never spoke a word of complaint about the lack of a good war during his years of service, he remained outwardly calm and reserved now. To do otherwise would be to advertise that war was not the honorable, organized, methodical activity, military structure, and discipline implied it was. To do otherwise would be to admit that war was pure, burning anarchy, chaos, rape, and vindication under a veneer of perfectly tailored uniforms with perfectly placed medallions and shining buttons, helmets that sat just so, and pristine, virgin weapons that gleamed on parade and besotted little boys who saw the martial beauty and fell deeply in love with the grand illusion. Eric's faithful adjutant, Major Elias Hauer, was beside him on a chestnut Brandenburger Warmblut stallion. Both men reined in at the sidewalk and greeted Leonie with courtly nods. "Is the proprietor in?" asked Major Hauer in perfect French. Leonie shook her head. "He is not." She watched Hauer translate to Eric. Eric's face betrayed no emotion. "Ich spreche Deutsch," said Leonie. Both men turned to look at her. "And I understand it as well. The proprietor is Monsieur Alexandre Renoir. He will return soon. In the meantime, I am the authority here. Can I help you with anything?" she asked. "Mademoiselle," Is this house what it is rumored to be? Leonie grinned. Well, I suppose that all depends upon what rumors you have heard, Herr Major. A whoremaster's house, Major Hauer replied curtly. Ah, you put a very fine point on it, Major. Perhaps I am a whore, but I am not a slave to a master. If those are the words you choose, it says more of who you are than it does of the house itself. And what words would you use to describe it, Fräulein? Asked Major Hauer. A place of business, a place of fair trade. Tit for tat, smiled Major Hauer. No, Major. Hard cash on the barrel for a roll in the hay. We are not here to be victims, we are here to make money. His smile had belittling intent. Well, mademoiselle, the German army is here now. I predict that you will make money hands over fists, skirts over heads, while we are here. Leonie bit her tongue and smiled. Comme tu dis. Colonel Goethe broke his silence. Major, that is enough of that language. This young lady does not require your condescension. Chastened, Major Hauer closed his lips over his smile. Yes, sir, of course. Mademoiselle, you will remain open for business, asked Eric. We intend to, yes. Very good. You can expect a brisk exchange. My men are bivouacked in the city center. They will be released in sections. They have been supplied condoms. I expect them to be used. We will not be sidelined by infection. If that occurs, you and your proprietor will be held to account. Is that understood? Herr Colonel, I understand, but I do not think that you understand. An agreement was reached with a commanding officer of yours that we would remain open strictly to officers such as yourself. There are other places that your men can go and pay pfennigs for their needs, but this is not that place. Mademoiselle, said Eric, I am not a party to any such agreement. And I am faced here with a difficult situation which you are in a position to remedy. Leonie cocked her head to the side, coquettish. And what difficult situation would that be, Herr Colonel? My men are warriors. They are hungry for war. They are well prepared for it. It is a fine line that we must walk. I need them ordered, but not civilized. I need them to be barbaric and violent, and yet strictly disciplined. I want them to be men in the finest sense of the word, and I want them unbounded from the world of men, so they will commit to the savagery that war demands of them. But I cannot have them raping every peasant woman that we come across. They would never do. You see the difficulty of my situation. Leonie's face did not betray the fear stirring in her. Eric continued, but there is a solution right before us. And you can do a great service for your own country, Miss Leonie Armitage. Miss Armitage, you and your ladies are that solution. If they throw you a few pfennigs and have their way with you, it is simply a business transaction. Yes, you are compensated, and if that exchange saves some innocent Catholic farm girls from them, it is better for all concerned. If my men carry only the badge of having enjoyed a few whores while they are on this campaign, instead of the shame of forcing themselves on some virgin children, all the better. Better for morale, better for their honor, better for Germany, and better for your pocketbooks as well. He laughed at the thought. And so, I must insist that you are indeed open for business to all paying customers, regardless of rank, and if they only have a little money to spend, a little money is what you will receive. Blue, I truly must insist. Leonie's smile veiled her terror. I understand, but I ask that you wait for the return of Monsieur Renoir and have this conversation with him instead of me. And when will he return? I believe that by tomorrow morning you will be here? Eric nodded. Very well. I will return then and make clear our intent. Danke, Herr Colonel, she replied. Leonie watched the two men turn their horses and ride onward for a further inspection of the town. She wanted to vomit at the horror of what he proposed. Long lines of men queuing for a fast, hard, cheap fuck. Instead, she closed the front door behind her and told the shocked and terrified girls what was coming their way. We must be prepared to run. Alexander will return and lead us to safety. Be ready. Oui? The girls all nodded quietly, fear tingling down their spines. They packed the money that Leonie divvied up between them and whatever keepsakes they could carry. They readied to make good their escape. That evening, in the Prussian cavalry encampment, with tents erected, the horses brushed and fed, pickets set, bedrolls spread, and campfires lit, the cheap schnapps started making the rounds. A sergeant, Wilhelm Knopf, overheard Major Hauer and Colonel Goethe discussing the arrangements they planned to make with Renoir. Colonel Goethe had remarked on the shameful beauty of Leonie. Sergeant Knopf thought that Colonel Goethe paused a hair too long in recollecting her face, but perhaps that was just his imagination. When the briefing ended, and Sergeant Knopf turned to his platoon, he gleefully passed the news of the whorehouse around the campfire with the schnapps. It spread like wildfire and thrilled the imaginations of the embarrassed virgins amongst them, as well as the boys who had anointed themselves with experienced veterans, who had anointed themselves experienced veterans of sexual conquest, when in truth their own experiences had been fumbling all too soon over explosions of semen. Another round of schnapps, and the boys were on their feet, teetering into the town, filled with liquid courage and desire, singing God Help Our Kaiser Wilhelm at the top of their lungs, while the alcohol firmly tamped down the choir of all their better angels. Renoir's worst nightmare was to come true. Leonie was on the porch when she heard the mob careening drunken through the streets. Leonie knew ruin was coming for them. No one was there to stand in the breach. Enculé de ta mère. Leonie realized she had been a fool to trust Renoir. He provided nothing but illusions, facsimiles of safety and security. Had he been there, there would have been nothing he could have done to save them. They were done for. She ducked back through the front door and slammed it shut before the mob turned the corner. Out the back! Run! She called out to the other women. None hesitated. They grabbed their satchels of money and raced for the rear of the building. Leonie pulled the tongs from beside the fireplace. She grasped hold of a flaming log and pulled it out, sparking and spitting orange embers, and dragged it to the hem of the front window curtains. The cotton fabric burst into flames that took hold and quickly raced up them. Leonie grabbed her own bag and hustled for the back door. Behind her, the fire began to climb to the ceiling and devour the house. Renoir's coterie ran through the alley, racing from the coming chaos as fast as they could. They did not get far. Before the bucket brigades could staunch the last embers, they had all been captured and dragged back, kicking and screaming by sentries who turned them over to Sergeant Knopf and his gang. They all suffered terribly for the deed. For the moment, they escaped execution. They were not necessarily better off for it. When Major Hauer awakened Colonel Goethe and told him what had occurred, He was furious at all concerned. He had Sergeant Knopf demoted to private first class with immediate reduction in pay. As he sobered up, Private Knopf was horribly embarrassed. His wife was counting on a sergeant's pay grade. She would just have to make do, he supposed. He figured he could find a reasonable way to explain it away. In the meantime, he would redouble his focus on being the best soldier he could be, so he might regain his stripes and the money that came with them. The next morning, Colonel Goethe and Major Hauer, a smooth leather case in hand, visited Leonie and her ladies at the occupied house next door to their command center. They were captive in the living room of the mansion, recovering from the night on couches and divans. Colonel Goethe gave Leonie a slight, courtly bow. Even bruised, she was a true beauty, Goethe thought. He'd felt a stirring of lust for her, licking his belly, but pretended he had not, disgusted with himself. Eric removed his cap and held it formally at his side. He brushed his hair back unconsciously. Mademoiselle, I'm sorry for what has occurred. It is a horrible breach. My men have sworn to me that they did not set fire to your house, and I'm inclined to believe that they are sincere, as they have confessed openly to the other things that happened last night with forthrightness. The other unspoken things of which he spoke were the gang rape of Leonie and her friends. But Leonie hoped to forget all the specifics of that madness, so she locked it away in her mind. He continued, You should know that they have been punished harshly under the military code of conduct. It was entirely unacceptable. Indeed it was, she thought. He leaned in enough to catch her eyes, her intoxicating, cornflower blue eyes. His breath caught a moment, then he kept on. You now see why I was eager to come to terms with your monsieur. Leonie nodded. She saw. You will all be compensated for last night, I assure you. He looked to Hauer. Major Hauer opened the satchel he had brought with him. He made the rounds of the room, handing stacks of German papier marks to each of the women. Leonie mustered a thank you when Hauer handed her a share. Major Hauer looked over. I would like a moment alone with the Fräulein, said Eric. Hauer did not bat an eye. Ladies, if you follow me, we have had our cook staff prepare you an excellent breakfast. The four women looked to Leonie. She nodded to them, and they trailed Hauer out. Eric was quiet for a long moment, looking for his words. May I sit? He asked. Leonie nodded, and he sat across from her, placing his hat on the end table. He smoothed his peacetime-won ribbons and medals. I would very much like to make you an offer, Mademoiselle Armitage. Leonie looked up at him. I would like to offer you my personal protection. Leonie did not have to guess what the price would be for his generous gift. A tacit agreement was swiftly reached. An awkward handshake sealed the bargain. And so it began. A new arrangement, a new offer of protection from a new, honorable man. Leonie's options were few and far between at the time. There was nothing to suggest that better avenues were sitting just beyond the horizon, awaiting her gumption to reach out and take them. She accepted his offer, though she knew ultimately, like Renoir, he had no true protection to give. 2.5 years later, that truth played out at midnight on Good Friday, and ended with the sacking, looting, burning, and rape of the French city of Amiens. Renoir opened his eyes, underwater. His mouth had submerged and could no longer intake air. He had to stretch his neck up to keep his nostrils above the water. Tears of shame fell for Leonie and his sins, joining the pool that was preparing to drown him. The end was now.